The entire history of Honkai explained by homulabs. I'm not monetizing this. Let's go.
This video contains spoilers for the entire Honkai series, plus Genshin.
Oh. Fan service. Let's go. Okay, some Genshin footage. Star Rail. Oh, what is this?
经验的破坏3是无敌的。
对，所以我觉得当时我们做原神的时候，因为原神是一个非常年轻的团队，大家其实没有太多经验，但是充满着勇气和热爱，所以我们就一直开始做了。
Okay.
外不倒，陪你到老。
That's awesome. Okay, let's get into it. What do we got?
The Honkai universe is a vast interconnected cosmological structure in which all the Hoyoverse games take place. In today's video, we will focus on its history and evolution with the addition of each new game. And yes, I know Genshin is not technically part of the Honkai series, but it is part of the Honkai universe. So yeah, I wanted to address that.
I mean, it's
before
speculated, right?
Actually, guys appear in the comments. This video is part of a series that explores different facets of the Honkai universe. If you want to watch the other videos in the series, like this one where I talk about how the inconsistent use of the terminology makes the cosmology a lot more complicated to understand than necessary, I'll leave a link to a playlist in the description. This video series was made possible with the help of the Hoyostens community, so a big shout out to them for all the help.
Okay. The early days.
First, let's take a look at some of the early works that laid down the foundation of the Honkai universe. Kai Aoyu, Liu Wei, and Yu Hao Luo, the three founders.
Liu Wei? Wow, I wonder if the city in Genshin was named after that guy. Hold on, I thought this was going to be exploring the lore, not giving us the story of how the game was created.
Of MiHoYo were working together on games as university students even before creating the company. Back in 2010, they developed an isometric tile-based flash game called The Legend of Saha. This game would go on to be the prototype for many ideas they use in the future games, mainly Genshin Impact. The game's protagonist was called Misei Nanatsuki, and she was the prototype for Kiana in March 7. Some of the characters in her name refer to an archaic way to say March, and Tsuki literally means moon. She was supposed to be the protagonist of Fly Me to the Moon, the first game released by MiHoYo, but she was replaced by Kiana later on. The action of the game takes place in the two nations of Neylan and Sumeru. The protagonist lost her memories and is journeying to recuperate them and get revenge on the gods of that world, who are real assholes by the way. Kai Aoyu, the developer of the project and the producer of Genshin Impact, took inspiration from his old game when crafting the world of Teyvat. There's even an NPC in Inazuma named after the protagonist of the game called Yayoi Nanatsuki. Later, in 2011, the three university students founded...
I love when they implement things like this throughout their history, just put it in the game. All their games, like all their inside jokes and stuff, they put it in the game, it's great.
And released their first game as an independent developer, Fly Me to the Moon. The game was a puzzle game about Kiana Kaslana, a magical girl that wanted to, well, fly to the moon, which, as the developers admitted, served as a basis for the story of Honkai Impact Part 1. Kiana would then go on to be the protagonist of 3 out of the 4 existing Honkai games. Next year, in 2012, MiHoYo would release the first game in the Honkai series called Honkai Gakuen, localized as Zombie Gal Kawaii in the West. Can you tell?
Dude, are any of these games playable?
The game was a side-scroll shooter based on the popular anime and manga series High School of the Dead. Kiana
Okay.
returns as the protagonist, but this time, instead of flying to the moon, she kills zombies with a gun, which kinda became her main weapon throughout the rest of the series. Unfortunately, due to the download-based charging monetization of the game, it wasn't very successful and almost led the company to bankruptcy. In a last attempt to save MiHoYo, the developers decided to rework the game and re-release it with the title Honkai Gakuen 2, known as Guns Girl Z in the West, but this time, instead of charging per download, they released it as a live service gacha game, decision that will change the entire company forever and end up draining
As soon as they turn it into a gacha, they're good to go, baby.
our wallets in the future.
Yeah.
Due to this decision, they needed to create more characters for the players to pull, so GGZ saw the introduction of many characters that would keep appearing throughout the series, like Raiden Mei, Bronya Zaichi, Murata Himeko, Teresa Apocalypse, and Yae Sakura. While the gameplay between the first two Honkai games was pretty much the same, GGZ would become MiHoYo's first ongoing narrative experience that laid the foundation for the Honkai universe. The game would introduce many important concepts for the series, such as the Honkai, Hershers, Stigmata, and many more. In an interview from 2021 during the CDG lecture, Kai Aoyu admitted that they came up with the idea of building a shared cosmology for their stories back in 2014 while working on GGZ. They called that idea the Honkai universe, and it would serve as a long-term goal for the company to build an immersive metaverse.
Alright.
The person tasked to create the foundation for the Honkai universe was GGZ's lead writer at that time, Lingyin Yang. She was responsible for the first event where characters from a parallel world are introduced into the Honkai series.
Cool.
The event was called Otherworld and told the story of Kiana Kaslana meeting a version of herself from a different world called Kevin Kaslana. This was Kevin's introduction into the series and served as a leeway for the concept of character variant that we see throughout the games today. While the event presented the whole encounter as a dream, it was later rewritten as a light novel, solidifying that it was real and Kevin was indeed another Kiana from a different world. Here's a fun fact. The event also introduced the first ever death of a playable character by having Kevin kill Bronya. During the event, Kevin offered the first explanation of how the Honkai universe works at a cosmological level. Kevin confirmed that MiHoYo was using the original interpretation of the many worlds theory and offered the earliest explanation of what would later be called the imaginary tree. Later in the year, MiHoYo released a new manga series called Benkwai Tree, also known as Honkai 3rd. The manga series used some of the GGZ manga as part of its story, but deviated from the stories told in GGZ. Honkai 3rd was the foundation of what would later become Honkai Impact 3rd and includes manga such as Escape from Nagazora, Sakura Remembrance, and The Mystery of Stigmata. In one of the author notes from the Sakura Remembrance arc, MiHoYo uses the word line, which is also used by Kevin in the other world event, to refer to the world of GGZ, implying that GGZ and Honkai 3rd are parallel world lines to each other. Later, in the second eruption author notes, they use the same word to refer to the world of Honkai Impact 3rd.
Interesting. Okay.
2016 would mark the release of the third game in the Honkai series, Honkai Impact 3rd. The game would continue the story of Kiana, Mei, and Bronya from the Honkai 3rd manga series and present a diverging path from GGZ by taking place in a parallel world.
Dude, this is crazy. There's so much history here. Like, I thought Honkai Impact 3rd was like the first iteration of these characters in this world, but man.
Not only that, but the gameplay was vastly different from the previous Honkai games, being a combat-oriented action RPG. Honkai Impact 3rd was also the first fully 3D game made by MiHoYo. Not long after that, the Azure Waters manga presented us with the backstories of Bronya Zaichik and Sele Volerei. While the manga was created for Honkai Impact 3rd, Ling Yi would later make a post in which she recontextualized the manga for GGZ, making it canon for for both games. It's important to note that at
Dude,
this
I've never
point,
played
Ling Yi was
GGZ.
still involved in the Honkai Impact 3 story. She was responsible for the first series of colored manga, such as Azure Waters, AE Invasion, Gratitude Arc, and Moon Shadow. Basically,
Okay.
she was behind most of the horny stuff that we see in the early
Let's
story,
go!
and she
Praise
also
her.
pioneered popular ships like Kiame and Bronzele. After that, a new team was formed to continue the story of Honkai Impact 3, and Ling Yi would remain as the head writer for GGZ until this year. She recently announced that she won't be involved with the story of GGZ after the ending of the Reborn storyline, and as far as we know, she has no part in the new story arc of GGZ.
Okay.
2017 brought the ending of GGZ's first major storyline, Retrospective, or Retro for short, commemorated with an animated short featuring Kiana destroying the Earth. The animation became
No
a
way.
cult classic in the global Honkai audience, with many people falsely believing that that was the ending of GGZ, when it was just the end of the first part of the story. Soon after, GGZ started a new storyline called Reborn. The ending of Retro revealed that the world of GGZ was locked in a samsara that kept resetting the world if humanity lost to Honkai. This concept would later return during the Moon Arc in Honkai Impact 3, when we found out that the world of Honkai Impact 3 is stuck in a 50,000 years repeating cycle, and it would also appear in Genshin Impact during the Sumeru Arc and Quest,
What?
but on a much smaller scale. And just like the Hoyoverse games, you are also stuck in a samsara of me telling you to subscribe every video. Seriously though, this video series took me literal months to produce, so if you like to support the channel by subscribing and
Everybody
giving this
subscribe.
video a thumbs up, I would really appreciate it. Thanks. During the same year, the Honkai Impact 3 team released the Anti-Entropy visual novel. This novel introduced the alternate version of real-life scientists, and by alternate I mean that they took a page out of Fate's book and turned them into anime girls. Which is, you know, one way to make science interesting, I guess. The visual novel gave us the confirmation that the Honkai universe adheres to the classic string theory from physics, more exactly the M theory introduced by Edward Witten. The universe is revealed to be an 11-dimensional structure composed of multiple brains, which in simple terms are string-like structures that exist in higher dimensions. The visual novel also confirmed the existence of higher dimensional observers that are able to grant power to the people. In this case, with the help of such a being, Thomas Nancy Edison sacrificed all her possible futures and collapsed them into herself to obtain great power. Lastly, 2017 marked the beginning of the development of a new title called Honkai 4. The game would later be known as Genshin Impact, and yes, Genshin
What? It was called Honkai 4 originally.
was initially supposed to be a sequel to Honkai Impact 3, a fact that is pretty obvious if you take a look at the alpha version of the game and some of the very early beta versions. When MiHoYo applied for the stock market, they were rejected because they only had Honkai as their only major IP at that time. So, to attract new investors, they removed the word Honkai from the title of the game. This would later prove meaningless since they ended up withdrawing their application for the stock market anyway. Since the Honkai Impact 3 writing team didn't want to make limited time content that would affect the main story, they introduced a new storyline that used the pre-established cosmology to tell a separate story through events and would not interfere with the main plot. The first event in this new storyline was called Sanguine Nights, and it followed the adventures of the Faceless Captain, a mysterious character based on the Captain persona, which is the player's avatar in the game. The storyline was dubbed as Captain's Bizarre Adventure, and similarly to the Otherworld event in GGZ, introduced the concept of similar looking characters from parallel worlds. The characters would look and sometimes even have the same names as the characters from the main story, but they were completely different people. The Captain verse would continue to tell its story through events for many years along with the main story of the game. Another important event in 2018 was the release of the second Eruption manga. This manga would become the most important external material for Honkai Impact 3, fleshing out the world building and the cosmology of the game. It told the story of a Honkai disaster caused by the Herrscher of the Void in the year 2000 and focused on characters like Siegfried Kaslana, Cecilia
Yeah.
Shariak, Welt Yang, Sirin, and Ado Apocalypse. This
Siegfried
manga would
and
expand
Welt.
on information about the Honkai and Herrschers and introduce important concepts such as imaginary space. Second Eruption also revealed that Honkai had a Gestalt, which is referred as the wheel of the Honkai in the game. The Durandal visual novel was released in the same year, introducing another major cosmological structure, the Sea of Quanta.
I just
The
watched that
visual
video.
novel told the story of Bianca Tagina and Rita Roswaise as they traveled to a bubble world in the Sea of Quanta. Ado described the Sea of Quanta as a chaotic space between dimensional manifolds that was parallel to the real world. The Sea of Quanta houses the so-called bubble worlds, unstable worlds that would inevitably dissolve and become data. The visual novel confirmed that the bubble worlds, just like the regular worlds, can house different versions of existing people, but character variants work a bit differently here. While until that point we thought that character variants could exist only as parallel versions of the same people in different worlds, in the Sea of Quanta they can exist as reflections based on a blueprint of data. For example, in the
What?
visual novel we
Okay.
encounter Anna Charles Darwin, the daughter of the Charles Darwin, whose counterpart in reality died as a child, but the Sea of Quanta used her data to create an alternate version of her in this bubble universe where she became an adult. These reflections
Okay.
of real people are called Star Whisperers. And finally, in 2018, Genshin released its first manga chapter. The manga introduced the character of Venti, who looks strangely similar to a character from Honkai Impact 3 called Wendy. 1 year later, GGZ would also introduce Wendy as a character and base her on Venti's Archon outfit from the Genshin manga, further straightening the idea that all these games take place in a single cosmology. The manga also mentions the name Murata in association with the Pyro Archon, revealing that there's an entire group of red-haired people called the Children
I read
of
that
Murata.
manga.
Who else is a red-haired lady associated with fire that is called Murata?
Yeah.
In 2019, Honkai Impact 3 finally introduces the concept of the Sea of Quanta in the game's story, expanding on the information from the Durandal visual novel. This period also saw the release of the second key manga. The manga was the first instance in the series where characters mention the imaginary tree visualization scheme. We see
Okay.
the introduction of Su in the story, who uses a bubble world called the Seed of Sumeru to observe other
What?
nearby worlds and look for a way to defeat the Honkai.
The seed of Sumeru. Interesting.
Su refers to the civilizations in the other worlds as leaves. Throughout the series, you will notice that multiple characters have different interpretations of the concept of leaf/branch, depending on how they choose to look at it.
Sure.
Su states that the civilizations that fail to defeat the Honkai will eventually fall into the Sea of Quanta, existing only in bubble worlds. This is the case with the civilization on Mars, which we will explore in part 2 of Honkai Impact 3. In 2020, Chapter 17 of Honkai Impact 3 marks the first mention of the imaginary tree inside the game. After
Okay.
studying the notes of the previous era, Ado describes the imaginary tree and the Sea of Quanta as two forces in conflict with one another. He associates the Honkai with a mechanism of the tree that tests the civilizations on it. The civilizations that pass the test will be allowed to continue existing on the tree, and the ones that fail will
Holy
sink
shit.
into the sea. While Ado's explanation is not exactly correct, he lays down the foundation for what would later become the most accepted understanding of the cosmology. Just like Su, Ado compares each branch to a form of civilized existence and calls each leaf a moment in time left by said civilization.
Okay.
During the same chapter, Ado uses the second divine key to look at other worlds in the universe. In one of the worlds, we see Fallen Rosemary, an alternate version of Rita, part of the Captainverse storyline. This confirmed that Captainverse was indeed happening in the same cosmology as the main game. The second world would show an image of Dvalin, the wind dragon from Teyvat. A few months later, Genshin was released in September. The game tells the story of two twins traveling through different worlds. Due to certain circumstances, they end up stranded on Teyvat, a mysterious world that hides many secrets. While it was confirmed that Teyvat is part of the Honkai universe, its exact placement in the cosmology is still unknown. 2020 would end with another important event, the release of the Alien Space manga. The manga told the story of the events happening after a post-Honkai Odyssey, an open-world game mode inside Honkai Impact 3rd that happens 8 years in the future. A Shixel squad formed by Adam, Carol Peppers, and Raiden May have to deal with the invasion of an alien civilization called the Sky People. The game mode introduced the mechanic of jumping and aerial combat to the game, providing a very different experience from the main game. The Alien Space manga told the story of Welt Yang and Void Archives after the invasion of the Sky People is dealt with. The manga also serves as a prequel for Honkai Star Rail, teasing Welt's journey through the universe and connecting Honkai Star Rail to Honkai Impact 3rd.
Right.
2021 introduced the crossover between Honkai Impact 3rd and Genshin Impact. This event had Fischl from Genshin brought over as a permanent playable character in Honkai Impact 3rd. Kaching was also part of the event as a limited time unit. Because the story implications of the two games overlapping would be major, Hoyoverse opted for this event to be part of a series of events dubbed by fans as the Idolverse. The Idolverse events are lighthearted and comical in nature, without any cosmological implications, for the most part. Just the characters doing silly, fun stuff. In this case, the story of the crossover happened in a parallel world where Welt and Aro came up with different game ideas for a collab between Shixel and AE. Funnily enough, the event portrayed how the two teams had very different visions and couldn't collaborate with each other, making me wonder if something similar may have happened in real life.
Yeah, of course.
GGZ and Honkai Impact 3rd also collaborated in the past, with many characters from Honkai Impact 3rd being brought over to GGZ. The last time, Alicia and Pardo were added as playable characters. During the Honkai Impact 3rd Starfire Sonorat concert at the end of 2021, Hoyoverse revealed a new game in the Honkai series, officially announcing Honkai Star Rail and releasing an animated concept trailer called Reborn 2. The animated short is on the official Honkai Impact 3rd YouTube channel, and it's meant to be a look at a very early idea for Star Rail. It featured characters like Welt, Carol, and what people assume to be an early design for March 7th. During the same concert, they also announced the release of the second part of a post-Honkai Odyssey. APHO2 would continue the story left in part 1 and introduce a new team formed by Bronya Zajcik, Timido Cute, and Lyle Kolodi. The story of APHO2 ended on a massive cliffhanger, and part 3 is expected to be released sometime in the future, dealing with the time gap between the game mode and the Alien Space manga. The beginning of 2022 marked the end of Aro's journey in Honkai Impact 3rd. Aro's story arc features a character directly manipulating the basic rules that make up the cosmology and creating an entirely new world. During this arc, characters reaffirm Kevin's explanation of parallel worlds from GGZ by associating the universe with a game server where different choices made by the characters can split reality into multiple worlds with different outcomes. The concept of imaginary renormalization, a technique that allows to swap the properties of finite and infinity, was also introduced in this story arc. This technique was the key that allowed Aro to manipulate the wedge of the world and create a parallel world where Callan never died 500 years ago. 2023 is arguably the busiest year in the history of the Honkai series. At the beginning of the year, Honkai Impact 3rd concluded the first part of the main story, the moon's origin and finality. The finale introduced the concept of ideas, embodiments of human narratives that can exist independently of humans. Ideas were a new species created through Project Stigma as an extension of humanity meant to coexist with the Honkai. The concept of time crystal was also introduced as a consequence of Project Stigma altering the space. Time crystals are a principle where time can be perceived in a constant loop. This event gave birth to an entity called I Lambda who could dream about the future. While moving through the Sea of Quanta, Kiana saw a projection of Bronny, an alternate version of Bronya from the Captainverse, reconfirming again the connection between the Captainverse and the main story. But the biggest reveal by far was the fact that the Honkai phenomena on Earth turned out to be orchestrated by a higher dimensional entity called the Cocoon of Finality.
What?
The Cocoon is a merged existence of multiple alien civilizations that propagate by assimilating other worlds into themselves through the samsara process. The finale of Part 1 also cemented the player as a higher dimensional entity in the Honkai universe similar to the Cocoon of Finality. I will not go into details on this because it's a very complicated concept to explain, but I have a different video about it where I go into more detail. So if you want to see that, I'll link it in the description. All you need to know is that yes, we as players exist in the Honkai universe and even have the power to intervene in the stories of these games. Alongside part 1 of the main story, 2023 also marks the ending of the Captainverse storyline in version 7.0, which is not released yet as of posting this video. After 5 years, the Captainverse storyline finally came to a conclusion in version 6.9.
Nice.
And will feature an epilogue event in version 7.0. It's important to mention that there are still some unresolved plot points in the Captainverse, but the characters achieved their main goal. As of now, it's still unclear if we'll have new Captainverse events in the future, or if we'll ever see the characters again. I certainly hope so, since I got pretty attached to them. Soon after the end of Honkai Impact 3 Part 1, GGZ also concluded the Reborn storyline, which started in 2017. The finale of Reborn confirmed the existence of a place called the Soul World, where the souls of the dead end up going. It also suggested that time is retroactive in nature, with the future defining the present and not the other way around. Terminus. And just like the Cocoon of Finality from Honkai Impact 3, the Honkai phenomena in GGZ was controlled by a higher dimensional entity created by the merging of multiple alien civilizations called the Will of the Commander. Lastly, 2023 saw the release of the fourth game in the Honkai series, Honkai Star Rail. Unlike the previous entries in the series that focused on a single world, Star Rail decided to expand and focused on traveling between multiple worlds. The game tells the story of the Astral Express crew, a group of people that travel using a space train imbued with the powers of the Trailblazed Eon. The MC of the game is a bat-wielding maniac who has a mysterious power inside them called a Stellaron. Star Rail greatly expanded the cosmology of the Honkai universe and introduced the concept of eons, higher dimensional beings that exist throughout the universe. Eons are limited by their paths, philosophical concepts born as congregations of imaginary energy. Mortals can also access these paths and get powers from them. Xandar 1 Kuwabara, the first member of the Genius Society, introduced a brand new interpretation of the imaginary tree visualization scheme. While very similar to Ado, Xandar's interpretation chooses to look at the tree not only from the angle of time, but also from the angle of space. Xandar keeps the view that each branch is a form of civilized existence, with each leaf being a moment in time for said civilization, but he also looks at the leaves from the perspective of space, associating each leaf on the tree to a star system separated by imaginary energy from others. The imaginary energy made traversing worlds impossible until eons appeared and changed everyone's perspective. To wrap things up, I want to give you a quick look at what each game is doing now and talk about the future. As the oldest sibling, GGZ is quickly approaching its 10th anniversary. The game ended the Reborn storyline at the beginning of this year and announced a new one called, very fittingly, Honkai Gakuen. The events of Honkai Gakuen happened several years in the future and introduced new characters and a new threat. Unfortunately, the game closed its global servers in 2021 due to poor translations and having a minuscule player base. Despite that, the game is still very active in China and Japan, having impressive numbers in terms of revenue for a 10-year-old game. Honkai Impact 3 is in the middle of part 1.5, which consists of smaller storylines focusing on characters that didn't have enough development in part 1, such as Sele and Fu Hua. Part 2 is expected to start in February next year. During the Hoyoverse TGS presentation from a few weeks ago, Da Wei revealed that Part 2 will take place in the bubble worlds around Mars and feature a new cast of characters. Part 2 will also be accompanied by a massive improvement to the graphics, an enriched combat experience that adopts the jumping mechanic and the joint attacks from APHO, and many more. The update will bring the game closer in quality to its younger siblings. Genshin just celebrated its 3rd anniversary. Okay, celebrated might be a bit of a
Everybody's
stretch.
pissed.
The game is around the halfway mark of the Teyvat chapter, having released 5 out of the 7 nations of Teyvat. Star Rail, on the other hand, it's still in its infancy and recently wrapped up the story on the Lofu. In my opinion, this is a great time to be a fan of the Honkai series and Hoyoverse games in general.
Sure.
Even the older games still receive plenty of love and incredible updates. So if you were ever thinking of jumping into the series, or maybe you already play one of the Honkai games and want to expand your knowledge of the series, this is the best time for you to try out the other games. Except for GGZ, of course, since it's not on global anymore. But hey, if you know Japanese or Chinese, you can still play it.
Huh. Dang, that was interesting. I actually learned quite a bit there. Let me know in the comments if you knew any of this stuff. Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys later.